He had rebelled, walked free, and ranged across the countryside, swearing to be his own man, and live at liberty on his own wit and merit alone. He had almost immediately been assailed by a murderous tinker, and had, unfortunately, killed him in self-defence. The fatality had not been intentional, and his spirit had balked at the deed, even though his rational mind had excused himself the manslaughter. So he had sworn a solemn vow that the homicidal tinker's blood would be the last that he would ever shed, or be responsible for shedding. It was the expression of an inner revulsion against all violence, and a fervent, almost visceral desire to avoid it in future. It wasn't cowardice that prompted Amos to do this, for he was resilient and brave. Rather, it was a general moral instinct, mixed with a specific impulse to curb something largely unacknowledged within himself. For Amos knew he carried an inner power that needed to be ridden and limited, lest it itself became the rider and put the spurs to him. And so Amos had committed himself to live a peaceful life of independent freedom. But, as Issachar Templebane had once said to a deputation of his sons, when they had been pushed by the extreme cold to hesitantly express the wish for more sea coal for the stove to keep the counting-house warm enough to work in, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. And now, despite his best wishes and intentions, Amos was both literally and figuratively afoot on the muddy road to London, still somehow travelling with a woman whose passive tyranny over him was almost as insupportable as the nickname she had given him, the Bloody Boy. The name was all the more unbearable because it was demonstrably apposite. Since so naively attempting to shun violence, he had been responsible for more death and self-slaughter than he could possibly have achieved had he taken the contrary course and embraced a career of violent mayhem. The memory of all that blood soaked his dreams, and the dark behind his eyelids was no refuge, but a nest of shadows in which the gory scenes he had witnessed lurked, ready to disrupt his sleep and infect his nightmares. Even when awake, his head was no sanctuary into which he might retreat behind the protective veil of silence, since the disappointed and deranged companion he was somehow bound to shared his ability to converse without words. The only benefit of the recent disasters and outrages that had been visited on them both by the band of Slur they had been forced to abet and then been abandoned by, was that she, the erstwhile ghost of the Itchward, had been so thwarted and betrayed in her own carefully laid plans that he had been able to slowly increase the privacy of his own mind. Her increased distraction allowed him the space to put in defensive foundations which she, if more alert, might well have been able to grub up before they bedded in enough to be built on. As it was, he had, without instruction, found a way to veil his inner thoughts from her. It was as if he had built a small redoubt into which he might retreat and find some privacy from the unwanted trespasser in his mind that she had become.
"I know what you're doing."
Her words came into his head unbidden as they sat under the twisted branches of a hornbeam that was still clinging to a few of its double-toothed leaves, now turned brown and lifeless. "Good for you."
"You're keeping me out."
"Am I?"
"I don't care,"
she wheezed out loud, voice dry and scratchy as the noise of the dying leaves rattling in the mild evening breeze above them.
"I don't care about anything except the one thing. I will do the one thing, and then nothing matters."
"I'll walk with you to London, but I will not help with that one thing any more. Our ways will part."
"If you help me, I will give you a present,"
she said.
"The loveliest of presents, really."
"You have nothing I want."
"I have everything you want."
"I want nothing."
"I can explain you to yourself," she said.
"I know who I am."
"You do not know what you are. You do not know why you are different. You do not know there are others who are different, like you, like me."
In fact, Amos did know there were others like himself, or at least he'd gleaned the fact of their existence from keeping his ears open in the service of the House of Templebane, his adopted family. He knew the Free Company for the Oversight of London was comprised of men and women who seemed to have unusual powers that made their existence somehow insupportable to the interests of his fathers and to the actions of the Slur. The Slur had worked in concert with his fathers, and had later taken him prisoner and then used